can call out?
You can enable them with hand gestures, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, is everybody here in audio?
Yep.
Yeah? All right, me too.
Here we go.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So today to talk about why I think audio is more than just pretty cool. It actually might be remembered as the first taste of transhumanism. So a little bit about myself. I've been at TV Insights for almost 4 years. I cover a bunch of different frontier tech verticals, and I encourage you to check out some of my analyses. I did a post on my own earlier this year about why I'm paying attention to the audio space. I've also done some long reads about Amazon and Apple that you should definitely take a look at. Also, if you want to find me or CV Insights, we're online at CV Insights, or I'm on Twitter at Pappageorge, N-P-A-P-P-A-G. And you might have seen our newsletter, you might have seen some of our research flying around, but fundamentally CV Insights is a market intelligence platform, mostly working enormous data sets to help some of the best companies out there invest into the tech world. And they love us, so you should definitely check us out. So what I want to talk about today is first the state of audio and AirPods, take a look at some of the data around that. Then start to think about where things are going, and then later on, how startups might be able to fit into all that. So, the state of audio. Obviously, if you're here today, you probably understand that podcasting, streaming, these are mega trends. And one of the biggest pieces is that the podcasting part has just come online in the last few years. So, among active listeners, about 65% began in the last 3 years. You maybe have been listening to podcasts for like bunches of years now, but really it's now like everyday Americans coming onto it. 22% of them listen to podcasts in the last week. And if you're a podcast listener, you're listening to over 6 hours of content in a week. And also another big development in the space is that Spotify and others are starting to get a foothold on Apple. Apple Podcasts used to be about 80% of the market share. Now it's about 62, 63, and in that time, in the last 2 years, Spotify has come on in a big way, and they've gained about double their market share where they were about 2 years ago, almost to 10% of podcast listening. And when they acquired Gimlet and Anchor, I think Daniel Ack really explained why. In this post, he said that over time we expect 20% of Spotify listening to be non-music content, and this homespun, this original programming is going to be a way to grow those margins, and also in a way pull a Netflix down the line. And so it's definitely a really interesting company to watch. Maybe potential $1 trillion company one day, who knows? But I think also with the software, with all this content that's now consumed by regular people, there's this open secret. If you have a pair of AirPods or maybe something like it, this new hardware is more monumental than it seems. If you take a look at some of the stats around this, AirPods are exploding in popularity. This year they're slated to sell about 50 million pairs. So at the end of this year, maybe even by now, they've sold their 100 millionth pair. And they're kind of pulling up for, in a sense, iPhones are well sold. Everybody who has one has one. Watches are not growing quite as much as AirPods, and at about $160 a pair, it translates to about 8 million in revenue. And while 8 billion is not really a lot this year for Apple, there's all these adjacent categories that are worth checking out. There's music streaming, there's hearing aids, there's wireless headphones, voice assistants, podcast ads. There's a lot of things to be paying attention to. But despite all this, AirPods specifically are kind of a friend, something you would only tell your friend. The news mentions actually, weirdly, are not exploding on it. This is those plotted out over time. We haven't even really surpassed the launch of it, which is kind of odd. And also on earnings calls, Apple's fairly quiet about it. I think they're keeping it a little bit under wraps. You can see they talked way more about it in 2018 than they did this year. And if you compare that to some of the other newer initiatives for Apple, they're talking about AR and ARKit. They're talking about Apple TV with far greater frequency. And I think part of that leads us into where we're going with audio. Specifically, it seems like we have. Okay. Sorry, guys. We kind of skipped the beat. So I think I first started paying attention to AirPods just because in my mind, it felt like more than just another set of earbuds. In a way, it felt like my first taste of transhumanism. And if you don't know what that is, that's this theory, this ideology almost, that the human race will evolve itself using science and technology to to go beyond its mental and physical limitations. And so when I was showing my roommate, my new pair for the first time, he started banging his head like this, and then swiftly declared, like, we should skip straight to cochlear implants. And I was like, I was a little taken aback. I was like, this is not just another means of listening, not another typical gadget you're going to forget in a couple months. This is the first product out there that maybe you can imagine in 10, 20 years getting implanted at the doctor's office or something like that. And taking that one further, some of the biggest initiatives in Silicon Valley right now, like Neuralink, or now acquired by Facebook's Control Labs, or even Magic Leap, these are all trying to be a new layer in our world. But I think, in a way, AirPods represent something that's here and now, and the ability to wear them 5+ hours a day comfortably is definitely a big deal, and maybe will be remembered as a precursor to brain-machine interfaces. So in that Magic Leap demo a bunch of years ago, where they're showing you basically, your laptop with you wherever you go, you're able to scroll through your emails. Maybe just the pertinent stuff would be said. Maybe only emails straight from your boss you'd hear straight in your ear. And as crazy as this sounds, Apple is definitely eyeing something not far from this. Taking a look at one of their patents for one of the AirPods that came out and was granted at the end of last year. They're thinking about gesture control, so just nodding your head, in future iterations, or having heart rate, temperature, and perspiration sensors, which are rumored to be in upcoming releases. They're thinking like this, and maybe having perfect insight into what you're doing at a given time is definitely going to unlock some new experiences using them. But of course, this kind of runs and maybe encroaches on another project that's rumored to be happening within Apple. A lot of people are wondering when they're going to drop this headset that was supposed to happen, maybe even this year, but if you've been paying attention to the AR space, it's actually been a lot of highfalutin startups have fizzled out. And while I'm not holding my breath on it coming out, I think in some ways it could be something that we use at the interim before it. And similarly thinking like that, like some of the early hits in AR with Pokemon Go, for example, were just an artificial layer on our normal world. I think AirPods could be something like that, just in audio format. But the reality on the ground today is that audio fundamentally hasn't changed. The content we're consuming is more or less the same we've always done. It's a little bit of podcasts and music, but I'm starting to, I would bet that that's going to change. I think there's a bunch of reasons why. I think specifically audio really hasn't touched the enterprise yet. I think if you are looking at some of the startups that are here today, some are thinking about being a social network that's audio first, definitely a big potential in that. And then also one last idea that I think maybe audio is really well suited to be is almost a gourmet internet to cut through a lot of the noise of everyday life. More on that later. But in the enterprise, this great quote from Mark Andreessen kind of highlights it. People are wondering, where all this consumption of podcasts and audio content's coming from. Well, the answer is they're at work. They have this Bluetooth thing in their ear. They're on their forklift for 10 hours a day, and that's 10 hours of Joe Rogan, and that's a big deal. And right now, I think it's kind of underutilized. If you look at some surveys about how people are listening to podcasts, only 12% say they're listening to it primarily at work. And I think that just represents like firstly, that people prefer to listen at home or on the go, but second, that the enterprise may be totally underutilized right now. And then second, this idea from The Atlantic that ran earlier this year is that workers love their AirPods because employers stole their walls. So I think in knowledge work, pretty much all types of work, there's some potential for more audio interfaces, especially as remote work becomes more popularized, as there's open offices, and also just the solitary nature, specifically of knowledge work. Secondly, the social network part of audio, it seems nascent right now. It also seems inevitable. If you look at some of the hits that are going on with audio first sort of broadcasting mechanisms. You see that Fortnite offered us a new means of presence, the ability to hang out with your friends using headsets, or just having a metaverse that's so compelling that you want to keep doing that. I think T2IL, a couple others that are here today, are thinking about being an AIM or a Nextel style network where you can drop in on friends. And then also, pretty interesting pivot from high fidelity, well-funded VR startup actually took its metaverse and realized that the head-mounted displays, the actual VR headsets, people aren't using them as much as they had hoped. And actually they pivoted to doing like a virtual room for doing your office work, specifically for remote work type companies. And they were saying that headsets is the primary way that people are using it. And then finally, there's this idea that's a little abstract, but roll with me here, that audio could be some sort of gourmet version of internet. There's this great tweet, maybe you've seen this. If something is too expensive for most people to buy, standardize it, produce it in volume. And then if later on it becomes so cheap that people no longer are price sensitive, make an artisan version. This is the eternal commercial loop. This is bundling and unbundling. You see this in almost every vertical and every space. So what does this happen, in the world of internet and the world of audio? I think Spotify and others, to their credit, have made content so available and so abundant that we're kind of swimming in too many choices. So obviously a big startup area might be algorithms that help you find the exact thing you would want to listen to. But also maybe if there was a bigger cultural pushback, just across the board to tech companies, if the pendulum were to swing back and people wanted a digital paleo, I think audio is pretty well positioned for a number of reasons. I mean, knowledge work is trending towards open, creative schedules. Also, if you just look at how people consume podcasts, they're doing it at 1.5, 2 times speed. I think on Spotify you can even hit 3 times speed. I don't know who's doing that, but I think it just shows you that people want signal, they want a lot of it, and I think audio is a great mechanism for delivering that. And I think no, movie or science fiction really illustrates that better than the movie Her. I'm sure you've all seen it if you're here, but I obsess over this moment where they're digging through proactively, with the OS into Joaquin Phoenix's emails. So she suggests this idea. Let's get into those emails.
Okay, let's start with your emails. You have several thousand emails regarding LA Weekly, but it looks like you haven't worked there in many years.
Oh yeah, I think I was just saving those because I thought maybe I wrote something funny and some
Yeah, there are some funny ones. I'd say there are about 86 that we should save. We can delete the rest.
So that's like just an amazing little piece that I think about. Maybe startups could be, maybe voice technology could be, maybe not even a decade. But where startups could fit into that vision today. So I think someone in the audience here, Megan Maloney, an investor at General Catalyst, tweeted that I think there's going to be an entire ecosystem of startups built on top of AirPods. And while I'm totally optimistic and tend to agree, if you look at the facts of the ground about Siri kits and the amount of developer freedoms that are available right now, Apple's really milking their upper hand for all it's worth right now. They're really, basically in iOS 13, for the first time are allowing other non-Apple podcast apps to even use Siri for playback, to be able to say, next podcast or stuff like that. So there's definitely a little bit of platform risk right now, and Apple's going to try to use its advantage as much as it can. But another thought here, maybe where startups could fit in, is just in audio production. I mean, a really interesting thought is that in video, you have 1080p on YouTube, but I can't tell you how many times I've had a podcast have to apologize about the audio quality. There's just so many problems with it, and in some ways, it shouldn't be like that. It's technically much simpler than a lot of what goes on with video.
Yesterday, over Szechuan chicken, I spoke to Detective Greg Campbell.
With Overdub, you can use your own voice to synthesize new audio. Just do this.
Yesterday, over biscuits, I spoke to Detective Greg Campbell.
I don't know, man. It seems like people...
There's all these amazing technologies out there that are blending both the text and the voice mediums. I think that's one also area that ties into production, almost being like the Photoshop for audio. Another big billion-dollar problem from someone you're going to hear later from today, advertising. Glow is just one of a couple doing ways to monetize podcasts. definitely a billion-dollar problem. Nas invested, so it must be pretty cool. And finally, one last thought. If you've played around with voice synthesis, like Michael earlier, it actually is incredible. And this is all a development that's happened really in the last year. So the Google WaveNet voices are incredible. Siri's getting a facelift in iOS 13. Alexa is also running its voices through neural nets. All this is making for extremely realistic voices. This is a brand new technology. It's now available to pretty much any developer out there. So I would think, if I were a startup, I would be thinking, how do I make a bicycle for the mind? How do I help people achieve more using voice? I think there's all sorts of clever tricks that can be done in the meantime. I'm really excited about those. So I'll be here all day. Please just come talk to me and follow me at Pappageorge, and also check out our work at CV Insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. We have time for one question for Nick. Just stay there. Anyone have a really burning question for Nick? Anyone? Okay, great. Well, excellent. Nick will be here at lunch. Chat with him. All right, thanks. So we'll move into the